Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. Joining us here on the program today is Greg O'Brien, his newest book, On Pluto, Inside the Mind of Alzheimer's, as he shares his particular devastating experience of what it's like to be diagnosed with younger onset Alzheimer's disease in 2009 at the age of 59. This is someone who has more than 35 years of experience as a writer, editor, and investigative reporter and publisher. His work has appeared on many of the top flight magazines and newspapers, especially on the Eastern Seaboard, which also includes USA Today. He's joining us here to share what it's like to have this experience. With the remaining bit of his strong cognitive ability, he's been able to share this with people to give them an idea of what it's like to live inside the mind of someone with Alzheimer's disease. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Greg O'Brien. Greg, thank you for joining us here on the program today.
It's a pleasure to be here. So, at 66, anytime anyone says beyond 50, it makes me feel good. So.
Well, certainly, a good feeling is going in the right direction here. But, as I read your story, I've talked with a lot of people who have had experience with Alzheimer's, but it's mainly in knowing or caring for someone who has had this. This is the first time I've come across, a book where it describes someone who actually not only has to deal with this themselves, but you also had 3 generations before you that were also in the same situation, weren't they?
Yeah, my maternal grandfather and my mother died of Alzheimer's, and I was my mother's family caregiver, and was, as a young boy, also saw my grandfather be taken out. And about a year ago, my paternal uncle died of Alzheimer's, and then before my father died, he was diagnosed with dementia. And so I've had a personal upfront look at all this. Several years ago, after experiencing the symptoms of incredible short-term memory loss, not recognizing people I've known all my life, not recognizing places I've known, tremendous rage, seeing things that weren't there, the impolite word is hallucination, poor judgment, and all of that. I had the brain scan, SPECT scan, and clinical tests because I was in denial about it, and it confirmed the diagnosis. I had 2 serious head injuries that doctors said unmasked the disease, which we could talk about if you want. And I carry the Alzheimer's gene, APOE4. So at that point, the doctors say, you're not getting out of it. So I went into a pity party. I had a WTF talk with God, and your listeners can realize what that is. And then I decided to work on my muscle memory, and with the help of a couple of New York Times best-selling writer friends of mine, produced On Pluto, Inside the Mind of Alzheimer's, which is the first book ever written by an investigative reporter embedded inside the mind of Alzheimer's, chronicling the progression of his own disease.
And you have some alarming statistics. The first one I found pretty disturbing is the fact that 1 in 3 people, from my understanding, what you were writing in your book, will have some experience with Alzheimer's directly.
Yeah, they and again, for your listeners, it's a disease that people have to take seriously. It's going to outstrip cancer and heart disease 7-fold in short years to come. And I also have cancer, and I'm not treating it. It's my exit strategy. But this is a disease that the Alzheimer's that they say, and if they don't find a cure, and they're making progress, but they're still a long way away. If they don't find a cure, that within 25 years there'll be 2 types of people in the world: those with Alzheimer's and those caring for someone with Alzheimer's. But nobody wants to go there with the brain, because Alzheimer's, it's under the umbrella of dementia, and it sounds like you're demented, and it's a taboo. And it was difficult in writing the book because I had to expose myself naked, and but as a journalist, I felt if I didn't tell the story, shame on me.
It's really, again, people can't know what this experience is like unless they've had direct experience. And I know it really was difficult, as you were describing, especially for your sons, in a way, to come to grips with what was happening here. But as one of them said once he had heard the diagnosis, he says, well, now that explains a lot of things that I've been experiencing with you over the last several months or so.
Yeah, and the families, it really, it really impacts families. And with my kids, they were watching, they were seeing things, they were concerned until someone puts a name on it. To fight an enemy, you have to know the enemy. Until someone puts a name on it, it's hard to fight it. And I think at some level, there was some relief in the family knowing the name of it because they were familiar with it. So I know that sounds odd, but it put a name on it.
Now, people who haven't had direct experience, and I want to kind of term this in mental illness, but, each one seems to be different in its own characteristics. But I know that a friend of mine had direct experience with a stepson who had what they call being on the spectrum of autism. And, it was really difficult because you kind of look at somebody who seems to be being in a normal way, but doing really strange and sometimes abnormal things, and you find a frustration in that. Like, why can't you get it together? Because you really don't see anything visible. It's so invisible, and I'm sure that's been the experience with your family, and it was with you, especially with your own mother and father as well.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you brought that up because, and I hope listeners hear this. There is a stereotype of Alzheimer's that you're 80 years old, you're 85 years old, you're in a nursing home, you don't know where you are, who you are, and you're going to die. And as the great Bugs Bunny once said, don't take life too seriously because nobody gets out alive. But that's the end stage. Alzheimer's is a journey, the experts will tell you, that can take 20 or 25 years to run its course. It's like having a sliver of your brain shaved every day. There are hundreds of thousands or millions of people like me who are out there struggling with this every day, trying to work. I've protected my communication and my speech, but there are other things that you can't protect. The executive side of my brain is in a free fall. And, you heard about the symptoms before that I had talked about. But other people, because they don't want to deal with it, they do the drive-by and they go, oh, you're fine. Well, guess what? We're not fine. We're struggling with it. And it gets worse every day. And because people just want it to go away. So because it's taboo and they don't understand it. And what we don't understand, we try to dismiss. And a lot of the doctors don't understand this. This is an Alzheimer's Association statistic. I'm on the National Alzheimer's Advisory Group board, as well as working with the U.S. Against Alzheimer's in Washington, D.C., and the Cure Alzheimer's Fund in Boston. But in many of the diagnoses, I could pick a percentage, but I could be wrong. So it's a high percentage. The doctors don't tell the patient because they say, well, there's nothing we can do. And the answer is, that's wrong, because there is strength in numbers. And what I'm trying to do is reach out in my book and say, hey, folks, you got this disease. There are strategies to get through it. And, yep, are there going to be days that are going to suck? Yep. But have faith, hope, and humor in walking through this. And remember what Bugs Bunny said. So do some good things on your way out. And if I could just use an analogy here, I apologize for the long answer because I don't know how to give short ones anymore. But
well, we really appreciate that you do, so people get a feel for what's really going on here. Believe me.
I should know this, but I forgot. Where are you located, the show?
We're up in the Pacific Northwest, Portland, Oregon. Okay,
wow. I love Portland. So I was just talking to someone on the Alzheimer's Association. I was at a function, and she was from Portland. Alzheimer's Association and AT&T Global headquarters in New Jersey near New York City had me down to speak with them, and they broadcasted to about 5,000 employees worldwide, and one of the people who was coordinating it for me was from Portland, and we talked about it. So it's a beautiful city. But in Portland, people would relate maybe to this analogy. I always ask people, how many people have ever lived in a home with a basement? And, I'll speak to a couple hundred people at a time, and most of them raise their hand. And how many people have ever done their laundry in the basement at night? People raise their hand. How many people have ever been down in the basement doing your laundry at night and someone's up in the kitchen and doesn't realize you're down there and shuts the light off? And people start laughing because they know what that's like. And I said, what do? You scream, you yell, you drop F-bombs because you're scared. And that's what Alzheimer's is in the early stage. The light is on, the light is off. The light is on, the light is off. You never know when it's going to go on or off. It's like synapse. It is synapse. It's the firing of neurons is not happening, and it's greater frequency and greater frequency. And then at some point the light is going to go off, and there's going to be no one in the kitchen to turn it back on, and it goes off forever. And that's the story of early onset Alzheimer's in its simplest form.
Now, in your book, as you were describing what this experience is, the title of your book is on Pluto, and I think you just sort of alluded to that a little bit about what this feeling is like, is that you slowly begin, because this not just affects you, the individual, but it also affects the relationships you have, because I'm sure that people at some point get to a point, what more can I do to help you? I just don't see how maybe my efforts are causing the situation to improve, such as the friend I was telling you about earlier. You see this happening and you think, what can we do? And you see those days they seem normal, like everything's going, and then it just slips, and then that frustration comes, and you realize as a person such as yourself that these people are really trying to help, but they get to a point where I'm sure they just think, what do I do? Such as the situation you were describing with your own parents, where your mom was just this, call it, battle-hardened person to take care of your father, but she got to a point she could no longer do that, and so now you were wondering, who's the parent now?
Right. Well, thank you. I could tell you read the book, and that's heartening. My mother taught me, growing up, I'm Irish Catholic, and with the name O'Brien, obviously. One of 10 kids, the oldest boy. I got 3 children, 45 nieces and nephews, so that kind of tells you I'm part of the Irish tribe. But my mother was an Irish fighter, and she refused to give in. And she taught me how to live and fight this disease for as long as possible. And she fought it until it overtook her. And I could see those symptoms coming on with me now. There's still some innings left to play. When she got to the point where she said, would you take over? And then that was her slide. She was like, I don't remember the big boxing thing. I forget the guy's name, but people who are listening will know, where the boxer said no mas. And she said no mas. And that's what it's like. But the key is to fight it for as long as you can. And you can do that with friends, but it is so discouraging when people do the drive-by, because my family can see. My wife is crying a lot. She's there. She sees it. And my mother, which was interesting. I had because I was the family caregiver on Cape Cod. That was our summer home, but my parents moved there, and I was living there. And the other kids were living in New York and all over the country, and they didn't want to deal with it. And anyone who has siblings and who's taking care of a parent for whatever knows what I'm talking about. And they wanted to assuage their maybe guilt by saying, Mom is fine, Dad is fine. Well, guess what? Mom is not fine, and Dad is not fine. Just like I can buck myself up for a talk with you, my mother could buck herself up with a talk with her kids. So they do the drive-by, and they'd say, oh, she sounds good. And I'll never forget when my father died. My little brother, Andy, who I love, was Easter Sunday, and I went up to see my mother, and she was sliding out in the final stages, and she gets the caregiver, gave her the phone, and because we had a year-round, a 24/7 caregiver living there, and she starts talking, and she bucked herself up, and I could say, oh God, Andy thinks everything is fine. So finally, it was right after my dad died. At the end of the conversation, she says to Andy, "Do you want to speak to Dad?" Which was interesting because I'm sitting next to her. And when my father died, my mom started calling me Frank because I was her protector. That was my father's name, Francis Xavier. So there's silence, and Andy now gets it. And I get on the phone, and he's got that sense of humor. And he goes, "You sound pretty good for a dead guy." And I said, "Andrew, today is the day of the resurrection." It was Easter Sunday. So, but that was his, I suppose, come to Jesus moment with the disease. And people need patience. They need love. They need touch. They need feel, because I don't care what anyone thinks. Alzheimer's does not discriminate by age, color, gender, sexual preference, demographics on money. It's an equal opportunity killer. And people who are listening will either experience it themselves, know someone who has it, or in the future will. And that's probably in maybe 80-90% or more of the cases, and that's no exaggeration.
Now, in your book, you describe what it's like to live in this world, and it was interesting because you used one of my favorite all-time sci-fi movies, and that was the 1982 Disney film Tron.
Right,
I was kind of surprised you used that, but I thought, I bet that makes a lot of sense, because there's that feeling of calm, but then all of a sudden there's the chaos, and it just never seems to stop. And it's like I described to my wife, I've been basically a lucid dreamer since I was about 4 or 5 years old, being awake in dreams. And I say, when I'm awake, I'm taking information in. When I'm asleep, the mind just never shuts up. And there was a period of time where I started studying lucid dreaming to figure out, what's this all about? Who knows what it really is. But the funny thing that was beginning to happen was how my dreams began to change. And the reason I wanted to describe this is I remember at one time that I was having a series of dreams, and this was in a single course of an early afternoon, where I had fallen asleep, then I awoke, and I was in my room, but the fact was I was still in the dream. And then I woke up again, I'm in my dream, and this is the same sequence right here, and I realized I'm still in the dream. And it actually took me 4 layers before I actually woke up and I was in this reality. To me, that's about as close as I can fathom about the kind of experience that you must have, because just think of the illusions and the hallucinations that you can possibly have thinking you're awake, but you're not sure if it's real or not.
Well, yeah, and like with Tron, you can't get out, so add that to it. You're trapped. And I'll tell you 2 events that happened. I don't sleep a lot, and so I don't want to wake my wife up, so I'll sometimes sleep on the family room couch. And this was a couple months ago. I woke up, but I wasn't sure if I was waking up or if I was dreaming, because I didn't know where I was. And there's some lights on, so I could tell, but I didn't know where I was, and because I'd fallen asleep with the lights. And next thing I know, I find myself in the bathroom, and I'm going, "What the hell? Where am I?" And now I'm starting to panic, and no clue. So finally, at 4 o'clock in the morning, I call the house to wake up my wife to find out where I am. And I call her. Of course, when you're dealing with Alzheimer's, you get a call 4 o'clock in the morning from your husband's cell phone. Scares the crap out of you. And I said, "I don't know where I am." So she gets all upset, all nervous. And then she could hear my voice, and she comes in. I'm in my own bathroom, and I didn't know where I was, and I'm fully awake. Because my brain would not tell me that that's my house, that's my bathroom. And that's what the disease is. I'll tell you another story, and again, it could have been a manifestation of seeing things that aren't there, but my job is not to proselytize. I call God God. Other people talk about the universe. That everyone finds their level at that. But one night I'm sleeping on the couch, and I had to get up. And a lot of times in Alzheimer's, you wander around the house, and I'm fully awake now. And I come back into the family room, and there's a fire in the wood stove. It's still going, so there's light in the room. It's the wintertime. And I see someone standing there beckoning me. It's a woman in her 80s. And I wasn't afraid. I was just stunned. And then I noticed this woman is wearing a sweater that I'd given my mom. And then I realized it was my mother. And she was beckoning me to come forward. I wasn't scared. I took 2 steps and something inside me said, stop. And then I realized it wasn't my time. And so I turned the light on, just because that was an instinct, and I turned it off, and she was gone. I believe my mother's spirit and the spirit of others, and this isn't wacky religion or anything, this is just gut feelings about what happens. They're out looking after us. And I went to sleep after that, and I had one of the best sleeps I've had in a long time. There was no fear, there was calm. And but I had to fight through, first of all, am I awake or am I asleep? And then I realized I'm awake. And then I had to fight through, is this real or is it hallucination? At the end of my life I'll know, but whether it was real or hallucination, I saw my mother. And that brought me faith and hope and peace.
Now, on the cover, you show we'll call it an illustration of a couple of dandelions. Most people know what dandelions are. I think pretty much everybody has at least one in their yard. But you said that was an interesting way of looking at this and sort of having that feeling of, can I just let go? and I thought, that's kind of interesting that way. Share that with us, if you would.
Yeah, the dandelion is a lot like Alzheimer's, how it affects a person. And it starts out as a flower. It dies from the head down, and then the head blows away in puffballs. And that's an analogy of Alzheimer's. My Randy Pollet, who is an incredible graphic designer, she designed that cover, and when she did that, I said, how did you do that? Why did you do that? And she said, I was a caregiver for my grandmother, and this is my vision of what this disease is, which I thought was a pretty powerful statement. The name on Pluto, and by the way, if anyone's interested, the best way to get on Pluto, Inside the Mind of Alzheimer's, it is in bookstores around the country, but is on Amazon. I always tell people it's the quickest way. And but bookstores are wonderful, so big supporter of bookstores, but it may be more convenient on Amazon. The light just went off in my head, my friend. I just forgot what I was talking about.
I do that quite a bit when I'm broadcasting.
In real time. You had asked me about...
It was about the dandelion, and you were describing how...
No. Okay. Now, which people ask me, how did I come up with the title on Pluto? Of course, Inside the Mind of Alzheimer's is easy to discern. When I was a young man, I was an investigative reporter at the Arizona Republic in Phoenix, reporting on organized crime and the mafia. And when I went off record with sources, I would tell people, we're going to go off record to a place that no one can hear what is said, and I call it Pluto. For whatever reason, when I was in my mid-late 20s, I was fascinated with the planet Pluto. Have no idea why, or I don't remember why. And then later, as we all do, when we're with friends, both men and women do this, you go off the record and talk about the unmentionables of life, and my buddies, when I would do that, would say, are you taking us out to Pluto? And I said, yes, I am. So it kind of became a thing with me, and everyone would talk about Pluto and Greg. So when I started to drift, because that's what happens, you fight this thing 24/7, and there are times when I say no mas, and I just let myself drift out. And anyone about Alzheimer's will tell you they call it the Alzheimer's gaze, and as my mother did until she left the planet. But I had to invent a place that I was comfortable going to, so I called it Pluto. And as I said, my mother, my grandfather, my uncle, my father have all been there. I've been out there, and there's going to come a time when I don't come back, and I want people to know where I am. So, hence the title Pluto. But if you look at the analogy, people who really want to learn more about this disease, look up National Geographic and all the things that have been written about Pluto lately. And Pluto is an analogy for Alzheimer's. People get a sense of the dense isolation.
In a way I can relate to when you were using Pluto there, because, here's this planet that's sort of like on the fringe of our solar system, and it must feel left out. Like, I'm on the outside.
Well, it's a dwarf planet now, and thank you, because that's part of the analogy.
Mm-hmm. And the reason I said that, I was going to say the reason I was bringing that up, and reading that in the book, I said, again, not that I have Alzheimer's, I grew up as a young child who at one point was diagnosed with ADD, ADHD, and this was in the 1970s. And, here I'm the oldest of three boys, and, I was one who could make friends. We moved a lot. I remember going to a different school every year up until the 6th grade. So making friends was something I could do, but I always had that feeling that I was always standing on the outside of the herd looking in. I would be included, but then I didn't feel included. And so as you were talking about, and sharing your experience here in your book on Pluto, and to let the listeners know, you do it with an extraordinary amount of vulnerability, like, here it is. It's about the best thing I know I can offer the world, and hopefully this will help people not only gain insight, but possibility, as you were saying, hope. And, but as I was reading this, I thought, God, this relates, I get a feel for what you're going through here, and it, like you said earlier, it just kind of sucks to feel that here was this life, you had it together, things were going great, and all of a sudden this gets dealt with you, and you're like, well, wait a minute, I thought I was doing everything right. What's going on here?
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's part of the deal, and that's part of the guilt, that's part of the shame, and I'll tell you another part of the shame is my kids have a 50% chance of getting Alzheimer's. I mean, look at the family record here, and it's not all genetic. It's just with some people it is, but talk about feeling guilty. My God, there's just tremendous guilt with it. And getting back to the Pluto analogy, Pluto's a non-planet. A lot of times people with Alzheimer's are non-people. Hey, and God bless the NFL. I used to do some consulting with the New England Patriots, who are my favorite team, and there is no Deflategate, by the way. No, that's just going to piss off your viewers. But
I don't care, because I thought that was stupid too.
All right, okay, but it's something that people don't want to talk about. But in football, we wear the pink ribbons for cancer. And you know what? I don't want a single cent spent less on cancer, AIDS, ALS, autism. Oh, my God, I want more. But funding, and we've had good funding recently in the Congress, and God bless them, but funding for Alzheimer's research, there's a lot put into the care, but research pales in comparison to these other diseases, and it's the only major disease of the top 10 killers for which there is no, and check me on this because it's online, for which there is no cure, and it's the only major killer disease that continues to increase. And it will impact, in one way or another, I would suspect, anyone who's listening today. Not that they're all going to get Alzheimer's, but they'll be impacted by a friend or a colleague or a family member or themselves. And it's not, what I'm trying to tell people is it's not the end of the world, Do some good on the way out. Connect with God or the universe, whatever it is, and realize that you're not alone, which I had to fight through. And so I'll tell you the story. Can I tell you a story? Because I love narratives. Is that all right? I'll tell you one other story.
You got it. We got time for one quick story. You bet.
All right. Okay. So recently, I get really angry with God. And I had another WTF talk. And I said, do you know who I am? I'm really trying to do my best here. And, I always tell people, by the way, I've committed every sin imaginable in the world. I'm not a Puritan. I've committed every sin other than murder and adultery, and I tell people I've been tested in both. So I'm just a regular guy. But I said, do you know who I am? And I said, you gave me clinical depression as a boy. You gave me prostate cancer. You gave me, which I have now because your body breaks down in Alzheimer's, acute spinal stenosis and scoliosis. I have no feeling in my feet, the tops of my feet, parts of my hands. And then a couple months ago, for 5 months, I had acute bronchitis or walking pneumonia. And I said, do you know who I am? And I want a God who's like a Bill Belichick, just God who loves me, in my face, wants to do the best. And I heard in my heart from God, the universe, whatever. When I said, do you know who I am? I heard back, yes, dumbass, I made you, and I have you right where I want you. And my reaction was, okay, I just needed to know that God, the universe, whatever is out there, and I'm not alone. So let's move on. I said, can we move on now? And I heard, yes, we can.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's all I'm saying.
Now, some time ago, I had the opportunity where I interviewed with a lady who actually was a caregiver to 3 generations in her family with Alzheimer's.
Mm.
Now imagine that, and it was pretty interesting to talk with her because it's kind of like what you were just describing. Is she got to a point where she was just going, where is my life? It's sort of like, why did you take my life away from me? And then all of a sudden, it was this voice that came into her, and they said, "This is your life. This is what I put you here to do."
Right.
And she says as she sat with that all of a sudden this calm came over her, and she now finds herself in a position where people are coming to her saying, "Hey, how do we do this?" So you begin to find the light, that special reason that you're in this. You don't like it, but there it is. And running from it isn't going to help you. Hiding from it, it's still going to be there. So share that with the world, because like you, there are other people that are wondering, what do we do?
Well, there's good that comes out of it, and grace that comes out of it. And, I spoke recently to about 500-600 people in Portland, Maine at an Alzheimer's Association convention there. They during the speech, they gave me 2 standing ovations. It was not for me, it was for them, because I tell the story through their eyes, and they know I don't want anyone to feel sorry for me. I hate the word pity. I'm trying to tell the story in ways that alert them. When I was through, the light went off in my head. I was totally exhausted. I was sitting outside in the hotel lobby, and my son counted them. 100 people came up and told me their personal stories and said, thank you. And I was sitting there, and I remembered that what I felt from God telling me, I have you right where I want you, saying, see how this touches people. And we're all in it together. And, I've become less judgmental in my Alzheimer's, more forgiving. And, that's maybe a step on our way out. We're all trying to get there.
Well, Greg, I want to thank you for taking the time to join us here on the program to talk about On Pluto, Inside the Mind of Alzheimer's. And I know, do you find sometimes moments like this that it takes a lot of energy for you to, let's just say, hold it together for an interview like this?
Yeah. I mean, I have my laptop with me. I have notes. I've given interviews before. I know key points. I have to keep referring to them. But, yeah, the light is going to go off. When I'm done, I'm going to go sit down and go out to Pluto. But this is what I'm supposed to do, as we just talked about, other people as well. And so we did it. And then I'm going to take a little break and go to Pluto for a while.
Well, thank you so much.
You want to join me?
I think I have many times.
All right, okay.
Greg, thank you so much for joining us here on the program. I'm sure as we post this, which we usually will do onto our YouTube channel with thousands of subscribers, that we're going to have an interesting thread on this. So.
All right, God bless you. If I could help in any way again, or you got other things you want me to talk about, you just let me know.
I will do. Greg, thank you so much for joining us here on the program today.
All right, God bless you. Talk to you soon. Okay, take care.
We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for joining us. You can visit and discover more by visiting us at Beyond50Radio.com. That is the number 50. Sign up for our free weekly e-newsletter. Stay up to date on what's happening in the world of Beyond 50. And again, we'll also be posting this here on YouTube for you to be able to discover more as well. You can follow us on Twitter at Beyond50Radio as well as Facebook. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for joining us. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.